Hey, welcome back into the live stream today. It is active here in the crypto pit for sure today as XRP has made some news, maybe for the first time in a little bit. And it's going to be interesting because I know the XRP, the army is out there in full force, and we continue to see the heat coming in. But if you haven't been watching, we've been dropping a few items around altcoins to watch. And of course, XRP has been kind of sludging its way through. We're going to dive in a little deeper today. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back to TechPath. If you're new to our shows here on the live stream, what we cover here is blockchain technology, the tokens, the overall protocols that happen in Web3, and what is going to essentially recreate the internet and the technology format that the human race will use in the next 25 years. It's going to be big, and if you're here, you're early. And that's the good part. You're early because you're in here investing in some of these projects. And I think that is the main thing to take away from today's video is if you understand Ripple and you understand what XRP is. And just for those of you who maybe do not completely understand XRP and its relationship to the crypto industry, it's referred to often as the banker's coin. And just as a quick precursor, what it simply is trying to do is replace a system known as SWIFT. The SWIFT ecosystem is a financial transaction system that runs around the globe, and it moves billions of dollars daily. And the likelihood is that the technology that Brad Carlinghouse and his team over at Ripple have created, and they've continued to do a ton of partnerships and deals, especially in the banking community, because the big banks are essentially what is utilizing the SWIFT network. That is how big money moves. And if this replaces that, then what you have is a massive opportunity for big gains in XRP. That's the short answer on what is XRP, how does it work, what's the cool part of it. But there's a lot more to it because obviously the SEC got involved in this and really started kind of putting some pressure on Ripple, mainly in essence of saying, hey, listen, we think you guys are a security and we think you've done something illegal by selling your tokens and offering up a for-profit. If you're a security, it has to pass something known as the Howey test, which is a pretty straightforward process that really simply says, if I promise, I have a security contract, I promise you're going to make money, I'm going to sell it to you in an open way, and those kind of scenarios are tested against what I'm doing, then potentially I've passed the Howey test, and that's really the big factor here. Now, there are a lot of scenarios that play into that, especially around decentralization. And we won't go into the weeds on that, but I would just want to kind of give you an idea of where the basis of this resides. And that's only if you've kind of been behind the game for a while, maybe new in crypto, and you're just wondering about XRP for the first time. Just so you know, XRP not available in the US or on many project exchanges where you can get to it. You do have to kind of jump through some hoops to get to an XRP token if you're buying it for the first time. So just to be aware of that. But most of you that are watching this channel today are XRP holders. You're OGs. You are the people who have been talking about and propping up this project for quite some time. And that is really what we're talking about here. I want to go to this first headline, XRP lawsuit, Ripple and SEC, of course, locking horns. I think they've been locking horns for quite some time over the fair notice defense. And this is a good point. This was just a quick article just a few days ago that really got into the element that the SEC has been faced with. But the silence is kind of broken last week. Basically what they said is New Year brought along a new litigation for the case. Its latest filing, this was basically saying how they responded to the SEC's newest attempt to strike down Ripple's fair notice defense. Again, just another scenario where the SEC, I think, is in a position where they're just trying everything they can to throw at it. I'm surprised that the judge has been able to allow some of these, a little bit of these courtroom antics to move on. And I've talked to several attorneys about this, and I'm also reading a ton from some of the attorneys that have really kind of focused in on this. That's Jeremy Hogan, you've got John Deaton, who's also been on our show talking about this. But they did talk about this last week. The SEC filed a notice to supplement its motion, keyword here, to strike Ripple's fair notice defense. It cited that the Fife case from December 21, where the court had denied the defendant's plea to dismiss the case on fair notice, that the regulatory body hoped that this outcome for Ripple's use of the term investment contract by showing the phrase has been bound by legal parameters since 1946. Going back to the Howey test, going back to investment contract about what I was talking about a little bit earlier. So that is kind of the new stuff that's happening with the case. Of course, there are some bigger news, and that is this letter right here. Monday's letter, Ripple argued the SEC wrongly applying the outcome of another case, being the case they're talking about, the Fife case. And that's just the point I'm getting at, is that Ripple is really in a position where they're probably starting to see a little bit of desperation here on the SEC's point. And I think this is going to be very interesting as we start to see this play out. A lot of people have been looking to this particular case of getting it done and getting it done quick. A lot of people thought this was going to happen last fall in September, October. It blew right through that, went right past the end of the year. And then, of course, we had the Omicron scenario come up. And it slowed down a lot of things, and including this particular situation right here, which is the discovery that was set for a month due to the Omicron variant. So that in itself is going to be a continued issue, because that was another factor of that coming out in, I think it was January 14th. So it's right at the corner of today. I'm just trying to think about where that actually pulled. Yeah, more delays anticipated as Gendler takes on high impact cases. For many of you guys, right here, January 19th. So with expert depositions ending on January 19th, there should have been a new stream of news coming from the courtroom. However, the joint letter submitted by the SEC and Ripple means yet another delay could be on the cards. Let me zoom up on that so you guys can see that a little bit better. Make sure you put your questions in the side chat. We definitely want to try to get to as many of those as we can, kind of how this is going. We will put a poll out in this one as well, just kind of you're curious on when you think this case might wrap up. Just kind of curious. I mean, there's a lot of people, court cases are, especially at the federal level, always moving and always changing. A lot of negotiations happening in the back rooms as things start to move on this. The other thing here that I wanted to kind of push out here is this thing right here. Major XRP bummer, why the expert discovery deadline in the SEC versus Ripple will be delayed further. A lot of people, and again, just another point of saying, hey, this has been pushed back. It is a scenario where that was the date difference. What I was talking about there is this says January 14th versus January 19th. So I think if they move that 30 days back, we're going to see this into February. But there are people that are pointing to this actually resolving in April. And if that does become the case, and I think that will be a good one. But the biggest news that is really kind of coming at the XRP and Ripple community is this story right here, which is a big win for XRP as Ripple gains access to the email of William Hinman, who is, he did this speech back in 2018, and it was at a Yahoo investment conference. And essentially what he talked about at this conference was Ripple, XRP, and Ethereum. Ethereum was the best explanation of it. And essentially what they're saying is that Hinman's position was, hey, we think Ethereum is not a security, and he gave several reasons why it wasn't. With his statement, because remember, he was representing the SEC, even though in the beginning of that speech, he made it very clear to make a statement. And the statement was that this was his personal opinions and not that of the SEC. So that would be the only argument I would have on whether or not his emails, which I think will now contradict what they're finding. This release, because of that statement, because of what he said, it starts to open up the situation of discovery around Hinman. So if you look at what they're talking about right here, SEC must give up William Hinman's emails on Ethereum. SEC ordered to hand over emails as part of an ongoing case. Obviously, we know. The regulatory agency will need to provide Ripple with emails containing drafts and the watershed speech delivered by the former director of the SEC's yada yada that he conducted, that Ethereum was not a security. The legal team has long maintained that these emails and multiple other documents are subject to privilege. This is something that's been a big scenario. They've been trying to protect that. And then Magistrate Judge Netburn, who's basically said, okay, not going to be the case. We're going to need to see those emails, and boom, they're relevant. You've got something now that I think is a big, big deal for whether or not we're going to see XRP and Ripple become victorious here. I think this is pretty much the key that is going to really tie into this. All right. Is ETH a security, CFTC. This is again another piece. This was back in August of last year, just to kind of show you the framework of where all this discussion has been talking about. Because if you've got Ethereum setting up as a non-security, then essentially the model has been created as a precedent. And a precedent, especially when you have government agencies doing opinion, that's how typical attorneys will address something, is they do something called an opinion letter. An opinion letter is what their opinion is based on the current law that is currently in place. Doesn't mean you can't go in and try to change the law or go in and do a Supreme Court ruling and get a new case ruling that would change the law. Things like that can happen, but that is definitely not going to happen here. Is ETH a security? This is the CFTC. Commissioner Brian Quintes gives the definitive answer, and it's pretty straightforward. He's simply saying he answered a crucial question. Regulators have yet to have clarity around the legality of Bitcoin and Ethereum. While there's overall consensus about Bitcoin's non-security status, the same does not apply for Ethereum. ETH is a non-security commodity. That's what the CFTC does, is they are a commodity financial organization that manages commodities. And that's where a lot of the arguments are around investments in cryptocurrency, is because of the decentralized nature, the function in which these vehicles work, the smart contract element. All these things start to play into this, and this is a big deal because, of course, this was already established last year, but it's been the kind of the teeth-pulling point for the SEC, because it's really what they've been leaning on and leaning into in this case, is that it is a security, and Ripple and XRP must kind of go in this direction. Just so you know, lots of sites covered this, so it's not just a handful of these side sites that you get out there on some of the XRP news. I would say this about XRP news, and it's something I was looking at when we were doing the story rundown, is there's a ton of people that are doing XRP news that are brand new websites, or maybe they're sites that I'm not even sure are completely vetted, not even sure where they come from. So I'm always wondering as to whether or not those sites are credible, but I always double check and we look at additional resources on this. But again, you see the CoinDesk article, same kind of scenario here, basically saying the judge is ruling that this is going to happen with the Hinman emails. And I think this is a good move for Ripple, and also for just in general what we're going to see in cryptocurrency. Last point here is Ripple lawyer confident SEC case will wrap in April. Again, you have to be careful about reading these headlines, because this looks and feels like this is the attorney for Ripple, but that's not necessarily the case. What they're talking about here is attorney Jeremy Hogan, and Jeremy has been on YouTube quite a bit talking about Ripple and the really kind of the overall case. I think it's kind of created his YouTube channel, but the point being that he's not really privy to the actual case goings on. And sure, you can analyze as an attorney all those kind of scenarios, but I just want you to take that not necessarily with a grain of salt, but with recognition that that is not the attorney for Ripple, the organization. So, but he did state that he thought this thing's going to end up, and we're going to see this thing start to really roll out here and wrap up in April. So I think if that can happen, then the real question is going to be, is XRP in a position where we have enough pent-up demand? And we've done something that maybe, I think actually it's the first time we've done it. It's the first time I know that it's been done in crypto, is we've done a forecast analysis of altcoins. And we did that. We did a show on it just here recently. Make sure and check out the video. But the point is that when you look at historical data on sentiment and amplification, you can start to put the puzzle together as to whether or not something is either there's some pent-up demand, or whether or not it's priced in. And I'm going to show you that data, and we'll go into that specifically as we get into that for Ripple. Before we jump to that, though, I want to jump over here, because it's not just the scenario of where XRP is going to be going as a token. Also, NFTs now are being tested on the XRPL as Ripple releases its NFT DevNet, which is going to be another big component of what we could see in the NFT world. We already have seen many variants that have come off of many other projects that are rolling in that direction. So definitely could be a scenario. I know we got the poll coming up, but let me pull that one up real quick and we can kind of take a look at where the poll is holding on you guys' opinion. All right, when do you think the XRP and SE case before April? 67%. Remember, guys, before April, you got tax season, all that kind of stuff happening, people moving around. Yeah, it could be. They could get really active. 67% before April, not in 2022, 24%, and never 8%. 8% never. All right, that's interesting. Poll 223 votes. So thank you so much for jumping in on that poll. And I think that is a good point. But back to the point of where pricing could go on XRP, because a lot of people said, hey, XRP is a $10 token, we're getting price suppression, all those kind of scenarios that are playing into that. And if you look at how the sentiment has been holding up on many of the altcoins, XRP actually made the top 25 of our forecast list. So that's the good point, because there's a lot of really good projects in that list. So we'll definitely take a look at that. And then this is just to confirm, Ripple's development arm launching their DevNet for NFTs. And I think this is a pretty cool thing. This is coming right here from one of the devs. And so I know how long people have waited for this, so I'm excited to let everybody know. XLS20 based NFT DevNet now available. Anyone who wants to begin testing and propose native NFT extensions for XRPL, boom, you've got it. And that is available. That was January 10th this week. So again, just more fuel for the fire, but it also tells me that Ripple is moving down the road strategically as a company. And what that means is they see the future of NFTs, maybe financial NFTs playing into this in the future, and then the opportunity that's happening on a global scale. So I feel like they already know this thing is in the bag. Their attorneys have probably got this in a position. Either there is a settlement working in the background, something's happening in the back rooms that are developing and moving into this, because they have not slowed one iota in terms of development and strategies. One thing I have not seen is some of the partnerships, but remember, Ripple really piled up the partnerships in 2020 and in early 2021. So once they come unglued with where this SEC scenario is, the biggest thing that's going to happen is the relisting on exchanges. Once exchanges get relisted, now you're going to open it up to the masses again. I think you will see just interest coming in that direction. And that's where the sentiment data that we pull really plays into this. And I want to get to that and where the XRP chart is and kind of just overall and how we've kind of pulled this over time. Let me go back here to our 3-month. And we'll kind of scan back quite a bit here. But you can see how far back we've been pulling data. So sentiment scanning all the way back in here to August, pulling sentiment in the 68s. Then we pulled in as XRP started to climb right here, and this was back in October. We had 74 scores, a 75 score that started to come in. Then, of course, we saw the fall off right here that really began around November. And this was, I think, because people realized that the case was not going to be settled. And we started to see a little bit of a downward motion in sentiment. But here's the thing. 7206 back here at the very base of kind of the nuclear winter at 70 cents for XRP. And then climbing out of that within this little bit of life that we've seen over the past few weeks, you had a 73 score start to come up. And then the first time I've seen 3 sentiment charts growing on XRP in over 6 months. So that to me tells me we've got a lot of pent up demand here and less priced in action. So what I mean by that is, and a lot of people look at this, pent up demand sometimes simply means once you release something or unplug something, you're going to get a quick rush of interest and a quick rush of capital and things of that nature, especially in investment vehicles. But when you look at something that's priced in, people are already expecting this, and the price is probably going to move a little bit and then immediately recoil. Sentiment typically does not move positive in those kinds of upward ticks if it's just priced in. So that in itself is very positive news of where XRP is going. And of course, right now we're trading right at the 77 cent mark. You had it earlier right here on the December 23rd where it hit its high for the last quarter on Q3 at $1.01. So there's definitely some options here. I think a lot of people have been asking when was a good time to buy in. I think anything around 70 cents is probably a good point of where you could get into XRP. I'm going to go to a chart real quick, and I want to jump into the the altcoin sentiment, because this is something that is really interesting, that really starts to kind of explain. This was an altcoin forecast that we did this week that really took a look at all the altcoin projects, and we went back 6 months. We did an array on this, and there's your top 10 right there. So you've got the Polygon, Sandbox, etc. The difference in this one is it's not active sentiment, meaning what was sentiment today or what was sentiment over the last week or next 5 days, which is typically what we're reporting on. But if you look at the first 10, pretty recognizable projects, then you go into the next 15, and of course right there, XRP, right in between Engine and Chainlink. So again, a great performance, I think, for the fact that XRP, even though they're in a fight with the SEC, is still performing overall as a sentiment stability, meaning people are still faithful on this project. Because I've always worried about that. And one of the reasons that Cardano is not on this list, we have not seen, I think, that community. Whether or not you believe in Cardano or not, the fact is that we have not seen that kind of community that's driving around it. However, interesting note was we acted in a poll with Vitalik Buterin earlier on with Ethereum, talking about which vehicle would you go with if ETH didn't exist, and ironically ADA was right there. So I don't think XRP was on the list, but the point is that it surprised me with especially around 500,000 votes on that poll. But anyway, let's get over to the questions today, and we'll kind of take a look at where you guys are going with it and just try to answer as much as we can. New crypto, Hinman's emails will show criminal activity took place over the ETH and the SEC before that. It's likelihood that we could see some very interesting things. Obviously, he's stepping down, so maybe is this his his shame march from the SEC, and they try to reposition this, or is he the sacrificial lamb? Would agree with that. Whether or not we'll see full disclosure of those emails, remember, sometimes those things get lost. You know how that is. Cullen, SEC doesn't want to lose or risk losing the case. They have a poor poker face. If they lose this case, it'll set a precedent, obviously, yes, to pursue legal action against other cryptos. I would say that's why a settlement is in order, because they can't really go to, if they go and lose, then it definitely is a problem for the SEC, and they don't want to lose that power. That's the number one thing that they try to bring into the game more so than anything. Lots of good questions in here today. All right, do you think Swift will try and duplicate XRP to replace them? John Davis. I don't think they can. The tech, I think, is moving too fast in Web3 and just in blockchain development overall. The advantage that Swift or really the central banks have is that they have a lot of money. And they also have the rails in which most of this stuff is being transacted today, even though we're starting to see XRP and Ripple, the engine, start to really maintain some very good security measurements in being able to transact those kind of things about moving money around in large amounts. So I don't necessarily think that will be a case, but I wouldn't put it off the table because it is central banks that are mostly involved with how that transaction. Remember, that's a 30-year-old system that's been basically cultivated for a long time, even when the central banks were being birthed. So lots happening there. All right, what's accepted? Okay, let's go to this. Aftab, what is expected for the XRP price for 2022? If you're holding through the end of 2022, and we do get a position with the SEC, I've often said that this is easily a $5 token. If maybe could really accelerate, depending on what happens with Bitcoin, because timing now starts to be an issue, because we could see the end of this bull run. If that occurs, timing-wise, it's going to be really interesting. If it only has maybe 30 or 60 days to get some breath under it, then maybe $3 to $5 is going to be its window. But if it has months to get underneath it and it can move with the market, there's no telling where XRP could go, because I think that will just continue to amp up the number of exchanges that it gets listed on. And just the global buzz on this will be huge, because if the minute this settles, there'll be news sites around the world, touting that crypto is now legal and should be worldwide, because the SEC, the governing body of the apex predator in the financial system, being the U.S. dollar, has now basically succumbed to the power of blockchain. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes down. This is an interesting one. Dr. Orlando says we also get the handwritten notes. That'll be an interesting point. I had not read that, so good catch there. I'll double check that. But if they get handwritten notes, first of all, how would you get those? And where would you get those? I guess those get filed with the SEC to a certain extent, but if they're the personal notes, I'm just kind of curious how that might look. Okay, XRPL is great. I use it almost every day, and some nice little earnings use it. Fees are tiny. Glad instance, thank you very much. That's another good point of use case that we've continued to see with Ripple. If Ripple wins, I don't think they're going to win. I think it will be settled. I'll go back to that. What is the price prediction? I still think it's going to depend on where the Bitcoin market and in general the crypto leader is taking the market. If we're in the bear cycle or if we're in a bull run ending, whether that's, even though I've got people that are saying now that it's Q4 for bull run and maybe even a Q1 next year, I just don't know that I can see that happening, but it's possible. We could see that happening. Let's look at this right here. I think legislation will nullify the lawsuit, hence the strategic delay by the SEC. As stated by Congress this week, new regulation coming within weeks, which will nullify. When was the last time Congress moved in weeks? Especially on something that would be this landmark. I just don't know that Congress, even though Tom Emmers, who we've had on the show before, is behind this, that's more on the stablecoin side. Could it be a scenario that we see at least action happening there and they could come back and back off something, including dropping a case, if there is initiation in Congress? But remember, Congress takes a while to move these things around, and it does, if it comes in as in a bill or through law, then you've got to have both the House and, of course, the Senate get in on that. So it's not something, and I don't think there's going to be an executive order coming out of this with, President Biden on that. So I had to put that in there, guys. I did. All right, so let's go here. New crypto. Hinman's email will show criminal. Yes, I think you're right there, man. A lot of people have been saying that, so interesting there. Dinesh, even if XRP wins, will the SEC, can they delay the outcome by appealing? That's a very good point on appealing the decision, but that would only be if the case is won. If it's a settlement, there will be no extension because both parties have agreed to whatever that might be. It's a fine, it's an extra, slap on the hand, don't do that again. We're going to go back and start. I think that's the win for the SEC is a settlement. If they are looking to win this thing, they settle with XRP and they live to fight another day. They go after other projects. They still have the leverage. They can still put pressure. But if they lose on this, they have a real heavy precedence to overcome. And I think that's going to create something that's going to be tough. Will the SEC possibly wreck crypto? I don't think so. I think we are now past the tipping point for crypto. And it's not necessarily crypto, and this is something I'm always in discussion with in some of the big conversations I have with partners and big investors and people in the industry. And the big question is, blockchain has evolved into something that's even bigger than crypto. Because of that, I think that Web3 is really what's at stake here. And remember that when the internet began in the mid-90s, the United States was really one of the first that had hands-off litigation and hands-off regulation to allow for that explosion to occur. And the United States became the dominant powerhouse in the internet economy. Now, the problem is right now is the US is not the dominant powerhouse in blockchain development. It's happening in other countries. All of these companies are, in most cases, setting up in countries that are more friendly to crypto, more friendly to blockchain development. So I think all of that will depend on how the United States wants to address technology adoption into Web3. That will be the bigger scenario. And remember, Dapper Labs, just here, we reported on it this week, now on the Capitol Hill with a lobbying group for NFT. And I think that will go into NFT regulation, which goes into, downhill. You've got the NFL moving now with Dapper. You've got all of this cycle now moving so quickly. I just don't think it's a scenario for where that could go. Could XRP flip Bitcoin on market cap? That would be a reach, but it's possible just in the sense of, again, pent-up demand, and depending on how fast and how quickly and how many exchanges would relist that. I have a feeling that a lot of exchanges, including something like even Robinhood, would put XRP on there to go. Okay, I don't want to really, hate on Big Boy, but I understand where you're going with that. So many other options here with XRP we're spending time and money on. Dave, you are right. That is a big one. There are so many projects out there, and I would say at this point, we have seen so much in the metaverse and the gaming sector for moderate to high risk. Those are definitely going in that direction, but I don't know. I feel like XRP is like one of those stalwarts that you should have in your bag, and it should be something that you look at for maybe a long term, because if it does replace the global SWIFT financial system, no telling where that thing's going to go. So anyway, lots to do here, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. The biggest thing you can do is join the Diamond Circle, because we're getting ready to do a big giveaway on the 300,000 sub, which is coming, I anticipate, this weekend when Bitcoin, we'll see what Bitcoin does, because I have a feeling we might see a little fireworks this weekend. Maybe not in a good way. We'll see how that plays out over the weekend. But anyway, hit me up on Twitter. It's @PaulBaron. I'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.